Alright, so in this video, it's going to be part 3, I think, of installing MySql and using Kodi with MySql. In this video, I'm going to actually install MySql and then set it up and configure it. The configuration part is important. Just to go over a couple things real quick in here. Install programs, and then I have all the MySQLs that I have, right? I was using this for a long time, for years. It's a real old version of MySQL. It uses a different storage engine called MyISAM, I think it's called. Now the newer SQLs use InnoDB. I think InnoDB is better. So I moved up to this version 8 here, but it only would default, for me at least, maybe it's different for other people, with 8 meg RAM being able to be used for the storage engine. And it was slow. So it took me a couple weeks. I couldn't figure out how to up the RAM amount on 8.0.18 MySQL. That version actually in this options file here, it doesn't have this. It doesn't have InnoDB buffer pool size as an option. Now you can change the options in the actual MyINI, which is somewhere here. Should be here. So this is the option settings that MySQL is supposed to use when it starts up. And in here somewhere is the InnoDB buffer pool size. Right here. So 8 meg, right? But if I change this in here manually to 256 or whatever, if I change it at all and then restart the MySQL, it just won't start. It crashes. On 8.018, that version, it crashes. And it crashes on every version I've tried if I change it that way. I'll go over how I figured out how to change it and make it work so that it uses a larger buffer pool, more RAM for the buffer pool at startup. I'll go over that when I configure the other one, but I just wanted to bring that up beforehand. What you need to do is get this. And this version, 5.7.280, MySQL installer community. You don't want the web community one, it doesn't work well. You want this version. And to get that version, so here's the download page, and you can go here. And this is defaulted to the newest server, which I don't think is good for Kodi because I can't seem to up the RAM for the buffer pool, right? It just doesn't work. It crashes. For me, anyway. If you can figure it out, fine. If it works, great. But I click on this, look for previous versions, and then we want 75728, and then down here we want this one if you have 64-bit system, and this one if you have 32. And then just download this, and you can click here, no thanks, just start my download, and then save this to your computer, and inside of this zip is this file here, and this is the installer. So that's what you want. So I'm going to go ahead and install MySQL now. MySQL installs as a Windows service, so you're going to want to know how to go here, services.msc, and open this up, and I have this saved here. So when this is open, you can right click on this, and this will be, say, pin to start or pin to taskbar, and that'll leave it here. So even when it's closed, I can just go here and open it. So on the server, I did the same thing I just showed you. So I'm going to open up services and make sure it's uninstalled. But it's a service, so if you need to stop your MySQL server, if you're going to shut down your computer, you may want to stop it here first. I'll show you how to do that after we get it installed. So there's different options here, right? You can either do full, which installs everything, You can do custom, where what you pick what you want installed, but what you want is either custom or full, I guess. Actually, let's do custom because full installs a router, I think, and some other stuff that you don't want. It's just going to mess with you a little bit, I think, when you try to set it up. So we'll do custom, and then we need the server. So this is the MySQL server, and like I said, we don't want the 8.0 path because that hasn't worked for me. I would recommend just not using it. If you want to play with it, if you want to set it up on a different computer, test it, try to get it working correctly, where you can actually up the NODB buffer pool size, go for it. I tried for a couple weeks and couldn't do it. But what you want is this 5.7, and this latest one is working awesome for me. So let's select the server here. And if you watch in here when I go to install stuff, if there's a conflict or it won't install, like because I already installed this notifier, so this one isn't available. But on some of these here, like here, it says failing requirement, so I'm just not going to install that because I don't have Excel installed on this computer right now. And then the shell, I know that's the command line. So I want that just so I have command line access if I need it, but you really shouldn't need it. The router I'm not going to install. The MySQL router, I think, is mostly for if you're having multiple MySQL servers set up and replicated or working together. But I believe it's for if you have different MySQL servers that are working together. Like one you might read from, one you might write to. They could be replicated, whatever. So if you have multiple MySQL servers and want to connect to them as one, I believe, or do different things, but that's not necessary for running Kodi, like, at all. Um, and I installed Python on this computer, which is why this isn't throwing me an error. I installed the 64-bit Python. Again, you don't need this. You can just get by with installing the server only and maybe the workbench, right? All right. So anything that was corresponding to the exact 5.7, like documentation and examples, I put on. The workbench, again, you can use the latest one, even with an older version like 5.7. Everything's unnecessary. All you need is the server and the workbench. If you just want to install those two, you should be fine. I'm going to go ahead and just install all these, though. Some of them might fail, that's fine too. So we'll give this a second here. This is how to do it. So click next, next, whatever. Um, so here's the first configuration that it'll have you do. We want to do standalone server. Sandbox is what I was talking about with the router. For running multiple MySQLs. And this kind of explains, so here's all the MySQLs. Here's the shell and the router. And the router, I guess, makes these all work as one type of thing. But we're going to do a standalone. And then this is an important thing too. I think, kind of, maybe not, because we're going to be changing the buffer pool size and stuff. So dedicated computer will use all RAM available, or at least it says it will. It doesn't on 8.18, which we're not installing. We're installing 5.728. But on the 8 version I tried, even if I selected dedicated computer, it would just use 8 megs RAM. It wouldn't use any more RAM. Same with this and this. It just used 8 megs. But anyway, I think server computer is good for most people. This is the default port 3306. You can leave this here unless something else is using it, which probably may not be the case. Name pipes and shared memory are a different way to connect to the server. You don't need these, but I would just leave these unchecked. You need to check this open firewall port for network access. This will open a port in Windows Firewall for 3306. So make sure these two are checked. And then click Show Advanced Logging Options. I do that just to go over it. Make sure this is on server. Should be good. Now, type in your password. This is the password for the SQL server. I just make mine real simple, but this is the password for root account. You're also going to need to add another user here. And this is the user that we're going to use to connect Kodi to the MySql server. So, and even if this says weak password, it'll still work. So, and make sure the role is admin, so this user is a full admin. For next, you want to have this checked so it configures as a service, which will be down here. I don't know what happens actually if you don't have that checked. I've only ever installed it as a Windows service, and you should do the same thing, I think. You can name it something different if you want. Start the MySql server at system startup. I like to keep this checked. Leave this default. And here's that advanced logging we were talking about. I like to leave the bin log off. Slow query log I haven't really ever looked at. This log though, the error log I did look at a lot. If SQL won't start up, or if you want to see if it cleanly shut down without errors, this is what you look at. And I'll tell you where all this is located when we're done. But so you can just leave this default with slow query. And I leave this default. And then I'm going to execute. And now it's installing everything. Or server-wise, it's configuring the server and starting the MySql server. So now MySql should be running. Oh, this is samples and examples. Okay, so samples and examples wants to connect to the server. So we do this, check. Okay, can make connection. Okay. Oh, that was for MySql Workbench. So I'll open both these, actually. I kind of got ahead of myself with the service, but I'll open both these so you can see. Oh, it already connected. Never mind, it is connected. So you could run queries and stuff from here, I think. Anyway, so we open up. Here's the default window. We can see our status. Server's running. If you restart the server, this will show as not running. You can refresh it here. It'll pop up running. Let's look at this quick. We have the pages 512 and pages used for data 231, right? We're going to go and only change them here and only one at a time. So we're going to change this to 4. Actually, before we do this, we're going to change the buffer pool size while it's running. So we're going to go to query, and here I have it set up. You'll need to run these one of these commands. This is to make my buffer pool 1 gigabyte, 2 gigabyte, 4 gigabyte, right? So I'm going to make it 4 gigs, and if we hit this lightning bolt, this will run this right now. And you can see it down here, right? So now if we go back to here, we can see it's at 0 usage and see those total pages available. They're like 20 whatever thousand, like 262, 20, whatever. They're effing big. 262,000. I got bad eyes. Um, so that's changed, right? Our buffer pool here, it changed. It's now 8 gigs. But if the computer restarts or we restart the service, that's not going to be saved. It's going to go back to being 8 megs. So in order to save that, so every time the server starts, it runs 8 megs, we need to change this to 4 gigabytes or whatever we set it to, right? So we did 4 gigabytes. And again, this is in bits. So, and when you make changes like this, you want to use, I don't like using it says here, if you hover over this, that you can use K or M or G as size suffixes. I don't like doing that. Just put in the whole thing. And you can use, again, you can use this gigabyte to byte. And this is byte, not bit. So this is 8 bits. And actually, I don't know if this is supposed to be, if this uses bits or bytes. I think this uses bytes. Again, I'm not sure. I'd have to look at that. Because if it uses bits, then this is off a little, but whatever. This works. So we change this. We're going to apply here. And now this changed it so it'll use whatever we put in there. In our case, 4 gigabytes at startup. Now we need to go make sure that it works and our SQL Server starts up. Now what I was doing is actually shutting this down. I was stopping it and then restarting it, and it wouldn't start back up. So when you make a change, it's important you want to restart it, not stop it. So we're going to restart it and hope to God it starts up. And it did, so that's awesome. And if we go to server status and refresh this, right? And if we go back to dashboard and check to make sure, see, it's stuck. The settings stuck. So that's changed. Some of the other settings I like to change is this. This is an important one, and you'll see this when we scan stuff in. So it says right here, set to 0, write and flush once per second, write and flush at each commit, which is the default, or write at commit, flush once per second. So I like to set this to 0, and what this means is that when you're scanning stuff in, or, doing anything, when you're querying stuff, when you look at info for a movie or TV show or what music, whatever you do in Kodi, it's going to be pulling it off the MySql database. And when you write stuff, when you scan stuff into Kodi, it's got to save it on the hard drive so that when the server restarts, it pulls it from somewhere, right? So if this is set to 1, each time you scan in something in Kodi, it's going to write it to the hard drive, which is hard on everything. It makes stuff a little bit slower. If you set it to 0, it'll write it to the hard drive and flush once per second. Flush means write everything. So this is what I like, 0. So it does it once a second instead of every time it adds something. Once a second is still plenty fast. So yeah, leave that like that, and then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to apply that change. And then we're going to restart the server. Make sure that, and you want to do this every time you make one change, do this process so that you make sure it works and you're not messing anything up, right? NODB log file size. This is one that should be larger too, I think. The default's 48 megs. For this one, I will use a suffix. I'll use gigabyte, and I'm going to make it 2 gigs. I think is fine. I mean, you could do like 256 meg or like whatever you want, but I wouldn't go too high with this because it takes a long time if the server errors to rewrite the log file. So maybe no more than like 4 gigs at max, but I don't know. I'm just gonna do 2 because I think that's fine. And then again, restart. And this restart's gonna take a little longer because it's got to rewrite the log file. So that's what it's doing right now. And it's running, so great. But you see how long it took. Now, if I would have made that log file like 10 or 16 gigs, it would take forever. And then when you restart the computer, it gives you hassles, right? So I think 2 or 4 gigs is fine. Next, networking. Depending on the network you have, if you have a good network, you can change this. I'm going to do 350. And then this my iSam, which I don't even know if it uses, but on this, change to 48. And we're going to restart this. And it's running, so it's working. Alright, so the main ones that matter, though, again, are the buffer pool size here, and then the log file size, and then the max connections. I think those will speed it up quite a bit. So that's the end of this video. On the next video, I will be installing Kodi, setting it up from scratch, showing you how I set it up, and explaining why I do it that way, and then maybe scanning some stuff in, and we're going to test this MySql server against this MySql server, which is default and already using 40% of the buffer pool. And we're going to see how much changing that makes a difference, and I'll show you some benefits of using a MySql server with Kodi. So I will see you then.